Hello and welcome to the Amber Spycast, your one-stop shop for all things His Dark Materials. Your His Dark Materialists are myself, Alaric, JoAnna, and Travis. We're all here to jump into chapters 4 and 5 of the Golden Compass. We're very... What was that?
That was a screwdriver falling down in my room.
How does that even happen?
I don't know. Like it fell off of a drawer.
This is a good time to throw it to you, JoAnna. You want to talk about our synopsis of these chapters?
Absolutely. Thanks, Alaric. So as we begin chapter 4, the master has invited several female guests to Jordan College and introduces Lyra to each of them, including a dark-haired, elegant young woman named Mrs. Coulter. She asks Lyra to sit next to her at dinner, and it comes up in conversation that Mrs. Coulter knows Lord Asriel and has been to the north several times. Lyra likens this to Mrs. Coulter being an explorer and is completely enamored by her for the rest of the evening. When the guests leave for the night, the master asks Lyra to stay behind for a talk. He inquires about Mrs. Coulter, and Lyra exclaims that she is the most remarkable person she has ever met. To this, the master sighs, then explains that it is time for Lyra to leave Jordan College. At first, Lyra resists the idea, not wanting to leave her home and friends, but her feelings quickly change when she finds out that she will be going to live with Mrs. Coulter. Early the next morning, Lyra is summoned in secret to the study to meet with the master before breakfast. He tells Lyra that he has something for her, but she must swear to keep it private, especially from Mrs. Coulter. The master gives Lyra something like a watch or a clock, a thick disc of gold and crystal called an alethiometer. He quickly explains that the alethiometer will tell her the truth and that she will have to learn to read it on her own. But above all else, he implores her to keep her own counsel. She leaves for London with Mrs. Coulter, remembering about Roger only after saying goodbye to the servants. London is unlike anything Lyra has ever seen. In stark opposition to the grand stony walls and rooms of Jordan College, everything in Mrs. Coulter's flat is fanciful and pretty, delicate and charming. Lyra is swept up by the upscale life of Mrs. Coulter. 6 weeks after Lyra arrives, Mrs. Coulter decides to throw a cocktail party. Although she won't admit it, Lyra is beginning to feel cramped by this luxurious lifestyle and longs to be with her friends in the streets of Oxford. On the afternoon of the cocktail party, Mrs. Coulter asks Lyra to remove a white shoulder bag she is wearing, which Lyra questions because it is where she's keeping the alethiometer. Mrs. Coulter's demon pounces on Pantaleimon, hurting him and Lyra as well, until she promises to say and do exactly what Mrs. Coulter asks of her. During the party, Lyra overhears some guests talking about dust and something called the oblation board, of which Mrs. Coulter is a part. Lyra realizes that the gobblers, who have been taking children and who have taken Roger, are affiliated with the board. An older gentleman named Lord Boreal speaks to Lyra, and it reveals to her that Mrs. Coulter wishes to use her to round up other children. This horrifies her. As she tries to gather her thoughts, she overhears that Lord Asriel has been imprisoned in Svalbard, guarded by the Panzerhorn, an armored bear. Having heard enough, Lyra and Pantaleimon decide to escape from Mrs. Coulter's house and run away into the city.
Well, there it is. That is just 2 chapters worth of stuff. And again, I was sort of thinking like 1 through 3, we were sort of diving in, and Travis said it was quote unquote big, those first 3 chapters. This one is more economical. There's, what is this, about 20 pages or something that we're talking about here? And yet it's so propulsive. There's so much happening in these chapters.
There really is. We go from that one party to another over the course of, I'm guessing, about six weeks. And we kind of see an extended version of what we saw earlier in the book, where Mrs. Coulter was during, the seduction of the innocent, to use an old term, where she brought those children and she captured the children, and she was basically doing the exact same thing to Lyra.
Yeah, and then the piece of information here that I think maybe I missed the first time I read it was that there was an assumption that perhaps Lyra was being brought into Mrs. Coulter's circle to, Lyra believes she's like her personal assistant. But
yeah.
She was going to be used in the capture of additional children, correct?
Yeah, she was bait.
Yes.
Yeah, she was going to be a piece of this. She was going to be a gobbler, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Which, I don't think I remember that being a thing. It was sort of surprised me. I knew that she was being brought in, and I thought maybe part of it was because of, Azrael or a connection between Mrs. Coulter and her, but the fact that she was really going to try to extend her influence, because we know that she has a lot of influence over kids and they're sort of drawn to her, but a child would be such a draw to get more children and capture more children.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
Right. It's like in Pinocchio.
Mm.
When there's that, you know what I mean? Like when they have that island where it's all like, the kid tells all the other children, like there's candy and there's all these things. And he's the one that gets them to come for this really awful man.
Mm-hmm.
It just kind of reminded me of that. Like if her role plays out to be that, like she'd be that same kind of character. And as we know in Pinocchio, he literally turns into an ass.
Right.
I mean, no language. Like he literally turns into like a donkey.
Right.
And can I just add, that was one of the most terrifying things in the world to me when I was a kid.
Right.
That scene I couldn't watch. I could not watch when he's all twisted and all the.
Horrible.
That was too much.
It was stogies and whiskeys and
Yeah.
Did
flashbacks.
Do you think that Mrs. Coulter believed that she could even get her to be involved in this? It seems like that's a big jump or quite an assumption to make that Lyra was going to be on board with this. Could she have tricked her to be involved in this?
I don't think Mrs. Coulter has ever had a reason to doubt her own abilities. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think that if she thinks that she can bring Lyra into the mix, she's going to bring Lyra into the mix, or Lyra is going to be disposed of.
Right.
And her monkey, I think, was dead set on disposing of them from get-go.
Right.
Which, if you think about it, since the monkey is her demon and has an insight into what she really thinks, or personifies what she really thinks,
mm-hmm.
perhaps Mrs. Coulter did doubt that she could change Lyra. That's why, the monkey was always so aggressive.
Right. That's like her conscience. That's her,
mm-hmm.
That's a piece of her soul. That's absolutely.
I have to, I'm a little tired of people snatching up on my girl Lyra, though. It's every time there's an adult around Lyra, a new adult shows up, they snatch Lyra and like physically threaten her. And this is not, I'm not pleased with that.
She does feel like she's at odds. She doesn't necessarily realize she's always at odds, but we're sort of led in the fact that she's sort of kind of fighting for her own survival without really even being aware of it. She's constantly sort of on the run, literally mm-hmm. and figuratively. And Pan's one step ahead of her with like, we got to get out of here. This is she even sort of begrudgingly admits that Pan was right all along.
Mm-hmm.
This is an interesting piece of the plot because it takes up 6 weeks of time. There's a lot of things that happen in this period of time. And it's something that in the film, for example, they condense this 6 weeks into, I think, one night, which is another reason the film has issues. Mm-hmm. But you don't really get the sense in the film that she could turn so quickly from being enamored of Miss Coulter and then being sort of terrified of her just because of one incident when mm-hmm. they sort of a violent, the golden monkey attacks her, which happens in the book, but mm-hmm. much further down the line, way after she's been drawn into Mrs. Coulter's world, with the wow of her life and her lifestyle and, her financial power and her political and her connections, mm-hmm. All those things. Lyra's just, googly-eyed over. Yeah.
Yeah. I love it because they use this phrase in the book that Lyra said that she had a smell. She smelled like glamour. Like there's this line where she talks about smelling like glamour, and it makes me think of other books, like in Percy Jackson and others, where when they use this, what they use to deceive other people, they call it glamour. Like in Percy Jackson, they call it like the glamour. And it made me think about how all of this, the act that Mrs. Coulter puts on from the get-go with Lyra, she knows enough about Lyra to know what kind of things to, almost like Lord Asriel, like, did you go on the rooftops? Like she knows enough or has figured out enough about Lyra to know the kind of things to say to her, to entice her and draw her in and to have her trust her. Because it takes her a very long time. And I think even when she yells at her, she's like, she doesn't like it, but she obeys and she does everything she's supposed to do at that cocktail party. It isn't until, further down when she hears and talks with Lord Boreal that things actually change for her. But she seems to put up with a lot from people she admires, Yeah.
Don't we all though, right?
Yeah.
Sure.
While we're on the topic of smell, there was something that came up twice in these chapters: the metallic smell.
Yes.
Yes.
What
that
is
struck
that?
me too. It manifests itself when she's enraged, almost like there's something about her anger that brings out that smell, and Lyra notices it twice, and also notices it fading. And I think JoAnna, she might have mentioned that the aroma of glamour returned perhaps after she sort of calmed.
Yeah.
That was
she smelled back like roses.
Yes.
She smelled sweet roses, and it comes back to her smelling.
What is that?
No.
I don't know. It's such a striking thing to me.
And why can Lyra smell it?
Right.
I'm guessing no one else can. Why can Lyra?
Proximity certainly is a big piece of it, because when she's very close to her, I think she kisses her cheek in one scene when she smells it. Mrs. Coulter approaches her, gets very close to her, but maybe other people can't smell it because of proximity, or maybe it's masked by some of her perfume or other things that she's wearing. But it feels dangerous. It feels intense. It feels scary. There's something about that feels unnatural. And I don't know, clinical, metallic can sort of smell like a doctor's office, which isn't necessarily this world that Mrs. Coulter is projecting, which is this beautiful, soft, warm, scented place.
I wonder if it's supposed to suggest blood, though, because blood's supposed to have a coppery smell.
Like President Snow in the Hunger Games trilogy.
Oh,
he smells like metal because his mouth is always bloody.
There you go.
Yeah, so that could be, maybe she even ripped that off from this book.
Man, we're getting into deep legalities now, man. Somebody's going to sue us.
There's some interesting stuff here where we're getting introduced to additional world building, right? We have the Skraeling, if I'm sort of pronouncing it the way it looks, which are like Native or Native American type people, right? Does that sound about right?
I took them as like Inuit kind of folks.
Sure, yeah. Yep. And then the Muscovites, which are Eastern European or Russian. And even the dust has been attributed to a specific Muscovite named Rusakov, and it's called the Rusakov particle. So we're starting to unpack some more about dust and how many people know about it and what people think of it. It seems to be more widespread than maybe we thought in the first part of this book.
Yeah. And then we also got our first mention of the Panzerbjorn, which is my favorite term in this whole darn book.
Great.
The bears, the big armored bears. We haven't seen them yet, but I'm excited about that mention. And the fact that they have a guy captured. So the suggestion, of course, here is that they are much more aware of themselves than your average bear.
Yes, they seem to be, more, I don't know, not sentient, but more. They have like a societal structure. There's a structure to who they are and what they are, and they were, able to be employed to capture someone. So they're sort of in the mix at this point. Lyra's also
everything I had not to say, "Hey, boo boo," because you said average bear, and I did it anyway, and I'm really sorry.
You know what?
You said it, and I lost it.
I was about to be so proud of us for avoiding that after I said the average bear.
I'm so sorry. I couldn't help it.
Let it fly.
Well done.
Yes.
Well done.
Did you? Another thing of interest here is that. This world that she's been brought into there's a similar amount of men, because the world is women still seem to be somewhat secondary to men in this world, in this universe. However, women, Pullman does not underestimate or devalue any woman that's in this book that is a piece of this story. Lyra is not only is she underestimated by others, but she's powerful in her own right. Mrs. Coulter is powerful, although no one really underestimates her. But even a woman that we're introduced to that seems to be, so there's a character that's sort of mansplaining to her about everything that he knows about dust and the North and all this stuff. And she's sort of like playing at being, in awe of his knowledge. She's an undercover journalist.
Yep.
This is the Adele Starminster.
Which is
Starminster. Great name.
It really is. It really is.
And she was maybe the first one that we had met that I was like, oh, this is an interesting character, that she sort of like falls out of the, what we've seen up to this point. And then it turns out she has an agenda. She's smart. She's sharp. She's maybe overmatched by Mrs. Coulter, but women have a real power in this story, and it's exciting to read. And, again, another reason why that namesake was so important to me as I read this, that Pullman is laying the groundwork for women being a real force in this series. And
they are at just about every level of society too here, except at Oxford.
Right. There are a handful of scholars, but Lyra sort of scorns them. She's not. She doesn't really like them.
Yeah,
right?
She scoffs at them.
She's not a big fan. Not a fan.
And I kind of think that we're seeing in Oxford, kind of patriarchy writ large. You know what I mean? Or maybe not writ large, but a last bastion of the patriarchy. Is if you go, because now that we've seen outside of that world, where I think you rightfully say that the world is a lot more equal, and women are much more powerful outside of in Mrs. Coulter's world.
Right.
But in Oxford, it's just also backwards.
Right.
You almost see, like, again, not thinking about the movies or anything. If I were to compare the two, I would in my head, I imagine Oxford to almost be a Victorian type era where you've got Mrs. Coulter's and you're looking at more like an atom punk kind of thing. You're like from a steampunk world to an atom punk world. With that quick transition. And of course, you have to retain the punk description, because we've got airships throughout. And, that's your surest sign that we're not in our own world.
Mrs. Coulter carries a lot of weight, and she does seem powerful. And in fact, the Royal Arctic Institute, she appears to be, if not the only female member, but she is one of the very few. And she even says she's going to, use her privileges so they can go and visit it. And Lyra's very excited by that because I think they end up having lunch there, and gets to see all the explorers, and she's again more of that sort of the thing that's drawing Lyra into this Mrs. Coulter's world.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think it's interesting too. When I was thinking about this as I was reading it, and I understand that Pullman, he's setting up this world for us, and he's showing us its limitations, and he's showing us, these like kind of dichotomies, and looking at what Jordan College is with grand, kind of majestic, stony, these deep, and then when you look how he describes Mrs. Coulter's world, I mean, it's like almost cliche, like so stereotypical. I mean, he's kind of mocking it in a way, like saying she is so hyper feminine. And it's one of the reasons, like, it's one of the things she says to Lyra later on at before the cocktail party, when she gets angry with her, she was like, you will not be coarse and vulgar. You will be perfectly charming, and you will do everything that I say. And so, I think that, I don't know that women have this necessarily the same amount of power in the world outside of Jordan College, even that you guys are saying. I don't feel like that's necessarily true. What I do feel, though, is that Mrs. Coulter knows exactly how to play it. Mm-hmm. So like that, because that journalist, I mean, she was kind of playing it like, like, oh, I'm going to play dumb and you can tell me these things that I need to know. So the fact that she had to, and Mrs. Coulter has to do that too, but she is just so much more masterful with it. And her power is such that people, everybody's, again, wary of her, just like they're wary of Azrael for whatever reason. Mm-hmm. It makes me think of, and I'm not going to get too deep here, but it makes me think of Immanuel Kant and his idea of the sublime versus the beautiful. And he was very clear in his writings that, this sublimity was male. It was masculine. It was male. It was noble. And that women didn't have the capacity for that. They were beautiful. They were charming and fanciful and delicate. And so, and that was one of the things that kind of came to mind for me when I was reading this. I don't like that part of Kant. Just saying. But it did make me think about that. And I'm just trying to see really how, I guess I'm saying I'm trying to see how Pullman is going to continue to use that, or if he even uses that idea, and how he sort of maybe how that plays out throughout the books.
Lyra, go ahead.
Thanks. I was going to say, I think that some of the power that we were kind of talking about before goes back to that femininity you were talking about, JoAnna. Mm-hmm. I mean, there is an equality of power, but I think it's exercised in different ways. And I kind of think, you watch Mrs. Coulter talk about how she doesn't want Lyra to be coarse or anything along those lines, because she knows that in this world that the way that a woman exercises her powers is through the sweetness and niceness and all that other stuff. Mm-hmm. And that Adele Starminster, and I love saying that name.
Great name.
She's doing the same thing to that guy who's just babbling on and just giving her all the information. Captain Exposition is just like dropping all the information bombs on her. And he's doing it specifically because she's, manipulating him into doing that. And when we looked at those, the women who were talking about the people at all the lunch parties that Lyra went to, I mean, they all had their own ways of transferring information and knowledge, and their own their own power back and forth, to each other in ways that I think the men in that world who may, from a legal standpoint, from a typical societal standpoint, may exercise more outward power. But I think the women in the world, their power is, they were just as powerful, but it's just much more subtle.
She, Lyra is coarse. She's rough around the edges. This is what we like about her. And Mrs. Coulter is looking to change her and turn her into, a more proper girl. There's a passage here that I really loved, and bear with me because I'm going to read it. It's relatively short. There were other kinds of lessons so gently and subtly given that they didn't feel like lessons at all. How to wash one's own hair, how to judge which colors suited one, how to say no in such a charming way that no offense was given, how to put on lipstick, powder, scent. To be sure, Mrs. Coulter didn't teach Lyra the latter arts directly, but she knew Lyra was watching.
Mm-hmm.
She's subtly changing her over these course of these 6 weeks. And Lyra is aware of it, but is she so aware of it? She's caught up in it, but is she so aware that she's being changed fundamentally?
That's what Pan's for.
Pan's freaking out.
Pan knows that she's changing her, and he's like, no, this is not cool.
Right.
I mean, it's understandable though, thinking, this, I'm not going to say this poor girl. Well, yeah, this poor girl grew up in a college surrounded by frumpy old men.
Sure.
She had even from then had like little to no guidance. They didn't even want to teach her. They were kind of happy when she didn't come to lessons. They didn't really push.
I love that line where they were like, oh, they were so relieved when she didn't show up, or she would quit showing up. She'd be like, oh, thank God.
Yeah. And so so I can imagine, Pan could be warning her all she wants, but she was finally getting a taste of what was actually like feminine. Mm-hmm. And she, and while she hated it at Jordan College when they made her wear those dresses, she loved it with Mrs. Coulter.
Mm-hmm.
And you read that passage that always makes me feel so, that one you just read, because it's like, that's the socialization of women, like right there. We're not told these things. We're just shown these things, and you learn it, and you don't realize it. And she doesn't either.
She's falling down a rabbit hole and she doesn't even know it. Yeah, she's falling. And Pan, just like you guys said, Pan's like, he keeps taking the form of a moth or something. He doesn't show his anxiety because he's constantly freaking out. And he's even freaking out. He's just in conversation. When Mrs. Coulter enters the room, it's like, oh, this is the form that no one will notice that I'm literally freaking out right now.
Right. I just imagine a little moth just like, yeah.
It's like, oh, moths just shake all the time. So let me make it be a moth.
Right.
Do you think, so let me pause on that for a second. Do you think the smaller and more fragile a demon is, it's literally more fragile? If a demon settles on a moth, is it more susceptible to being hurt or injured?
I mean, it feels that way. Oh my gosh, the journalist's name. I'll let you say it, Travis, since you love it so much.
Adele Starminster.
Adele Starminster. Her demon is a butterfly.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the butterfly, really, yes. And when she gets yelled at or like talked to by Mrs. Coulter, it faints.
Stunned.
Like on her shoulder. It's like, and so she's like, yeah. And she's holding it. And which I guess is also how she is, because if she were more of an aggressive or an assertive or whatever powerful woman, she would have like maybe stood up or said something to Mrs. Coulter, but she wilted just as quickly as her little demon did. So, yeah.
The whole demon thing, it takes me back to something I've been thinking about since our last show, and with the servants, how they were all dogs. Still kind of freaks me out a little bit, because I'm going to get deep for a second. It made me wonder, okay, was there slavery in that world? Because if there was did that mean like an entire class of people like were dogs, that they considered themselves dogs? And then I had this idea for like the first person to rise up and their demon wasn't a dog, and they realized that that's not what they needed to be. And it, the more I think about, I think about the personification of your life as this little animal, the more it troubles me and intrigues me. And I kind of think that that's what Pullman's looking for. Like, he doesn't want you to just like dive into this and say, I love it. I think, we should take some of the disturbing implications of it. I mean, because like you're basically walking around with a personification of yourself. Like last week we were talking about, what would our individual demons be?
Lemur.
Guinea pig. And And I just am, just the thought of having so much of yourself out there for other people to look at and interpret. Like we can have our own internal thoughts, our souls and everything hidden. We can bottle them all away, but they've got theirs right there. And you can kind of see what kind of person they are just by their demon. I mean, Lord Azrael, we've got the Mrs. Coulter's monkey.
Lord Boreal's snake.
Right.
Serpent. Yeah.
Right.
Who's going to
trust the guy with the snake?
It's like right away.
Right. Right. It's like a Slytherin.
100%.
Yep.
Who's going to trust that guy?
Nobody.
Right.
But they do.
Right. So is there no interpretation of demons in this world? So yeah, it's just the concept is still a lot for me to discuss, and I'm probably going to come back to this every week, every time we learn more.
All right. So
sure.
The physical link between the demons is really punctuated here in this part of the book when the golden monkey takes hold of Pan and really throttles him.
Yeah.
And Lyra really feels it and is really upset by it. And that this is really the first time we've seen that, right?
Mm-hmm. And
it's kind of shocking in the moment. I knew it was coming, and I'm aware of that link, but it's pretty terrifying. And you sort of know Lyra's kind of losing it. She is extremely upset by this. And that's a real betrayal of trust between the two of them. Not to say that, that was sort of the final straw, but I don't think demons are supposed to touch other demons. That's kind of a unwritten rule or a written rule that they need to be, certainly a person shouldn't touch another demon, but demons touching each other, they need to be allowed to do that. They need to be more familiar. And the golden monkey is very forward in doing this with other demons, and now has attacked Pan.
Yeah. And, because we saw him do that when he captured that child, the first child, when he took the little bird in his hand and walked away with him. I wonder what that says about Mrs. Coulter and her attitude towards demons.
Mm-hmm.
Does she think they're relatively unimportant, or does she think the demon of children, because they're not fully formed yet, are unimportant? Important?
Does she care about her own demon? Is it clear? She certainly uses it almost as like a right-hand man, like muscle almost.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But is her own demon important to her? I would assume it would be, but you're right. It's not.
I mean, I don't know that she would only be dynamic there. I think one of the things that's so odd is the way that she kept her calm exterior. Like she was fixing flowers, mm-hmm. and the monkey was, with cold, clinical. He was hurting Pan, but he wasn't angry. The book says he wasn't angry. Mm-hmm. It was like he was pulling on his ear just to see, how far can I do this to see how it hurts you? Like he was enjoying it, but she was totally calm.
Emotionless. Yeah, very much so. And even, you're right. Even the golden monkey is sort of emotionless, like a child pulling wings off a bug. Like there's mm-hmm. almost just very little reaction, except for Lyra and Pan, freaking out.
Right.
Yeah. The violation there is just pretty horrific. And, just to go from the wonderful world that Mrs. Coulter had created for Lyra, it was basically Daddy Warbucks, and Little Orphan Annie, and then if Daddy Warbucks had turned on Annie at some point, that would just be a terrible betrayal. And I feel like that's exactly what happened here. It's that same kind of betrayal that this woman, this Mrs. Coulter, keeps committing to children. Like she keeps doing this to kids over and over.
And as important as Lyra might seem to her, we know what she's capable of, and we know what she's done with other children. She may think very little of children in general, and even Lyra having some importance to her, maybe there's a limit to how much she can really care about another child.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it's so much, it's just like in anything, any kind of like, I think, abuse situation, and it's about power. Like, it's just about, she is just exerting her power. Because Lyra, after she says, I promise, like, I won't, I'll take it off. Lyra gets irritated, and she walks away, she slams the door, and Mrs. Coulter doesn't even let a second pass. She follows her, and then she says to her, hey, Lyra, do you want to do this? Because if we have a confrontation, I'm going to win it. Mm-hmm. And you don't want to do it. You're not going to be coarse. You're not going to be vulgar. You're going to do what I say. And then she says, do you got it? And Lyra's like, yeah. And then she says, so kiss me. Oh. She asks her for a kiss. Mm-hmm. How effed up is that? That's so screwy.
Yeah, I was so upset at that scene. There was just, the whole dynamic was just so disgusting to me. As a parent, I can't imagine, forcing your child, who obviously is in dire emotional straits at that moment, to then, give me a kiss just to show me that you love me.
This is after 6 full weeks. She's been living with her this whole time. They've been having this magical time together, which, other than the mention of dust making the golden monkey's hair bristle, and noticing it, it's been pretty lighthearted and airy and wonderful. This was a real heel turn, for lack of a better term, a real shift in the dynamic between the two of them. And what's so cool about Lyra and Pan is, as sort of disgusting as how the end of that scene plays out, a switch is turned. Even before she learns about the gobblers, even before she learns about the connection between the gobblers, she's already sort of, in my opinion, she's already sort of thinking about this maybe not being such a great situation.
Yep. Lyra was done with that situation right there.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting too, that as she's, that she's still, even after, up until that point, one of the things I really love is this description where they said that Lyra was following Mrs. Coulter around, and it was like she was her demon. Mm-hmm. I thought, and I just love that. It was such a cool thing to me, because, and that's why I guess I'm bringing it up, because then if you can see that break, to go from where, this had to be that breaking point, to go from following someone around and in utter just awe, almost like they were their demon, to this is it. That was the moment. I think you're right, Travis, is what I'm trying to say. It's this was this moment where she was like, no more.
Yep. Just, I can't do this. And which is kind of interesting because, like I alluded to earlier, Lyra has a lot of these relationships. All of her relationships are, to some degree, abusive. Her and the master's awful to her. The people in the kitchen are. Lord Osriel, we discussed last week, is pretty harsh towards her. But this, I think, pushed her over the edge, because she really did think that Mrs. Coulter was an escape. An escape from all that. And, she just took that away from her in one stroke.
She hasn't really needed anyone. I think she hasn't thought that she's needed anyone in her life. And Mrs. Coulter was the first individual that she came across that she thought maybe she did need another presence in her life. She was sort of on board with being taught and living this life and making a shift. I mean, she really leaves Jordan overnight. It's like she meets Mrs. Coulter, and then the next morning she leaves and doesn't really say goodbye. I mean, she kind of just ditches. But as we, as the end of chapter 5, they go on the run. She could realize at that moment she maybe doesn't really need anyone else. Maybe she is better off on her own. She realizes that, she, not just for her own safety, but maybe she's just better off.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm still a little piqued about how she just ditched Roger when she left.
She forgets him and remembers him and forgets him and remembers him. She feels bad about forgetting him when she remembers him, but then she forgets him again. It plays out over the course of these 2 chapters quite a bit. She's losing touch with her old life a little bit, and he's a big part of that.
Yeah, and she's fantasizing about this whole other life where like Mrs. Coulter will marry Lord Asriel and they'll adopt her, and then they'll all go together and look for Roger and live this life. Like, like she's just dreaming of this other kind of life for her that no one, I guess she's looking for it in these pieces, and she's trying to piece together these things in her life to make it whole.
It's that fantasy was more naive, really, than I really took Lyra for being. She's not that naive, but she's swept up in all this. And you're right, she's sort of thinking, God, this would be kind of great. And she starts putting these little puzzle pieces together about her life would be great if all these things come together. But that's, again, so foreign, not really who she is, that we've been led to believe is her personality. And she's falling down into this well and not able to come out of it, or luckily she does, but she's getting trapped.
I mean, she's never had a reason to believe that a family was an option for her, right? And now she knows she has Lord Asriel, but, he's not a family man by any stretch. But with Mrs. Coulter in place, who knows, in her mind, maybe he could change. Maybe they could become the family that she's always wanted, or didn't know that she wanted until she was presented with the possibility.
Right. Well, and I think it's interesting the way that the master, when he, you were saying how it was naive, Alaric, like, and not the character that we were led to believe or see that she is. I mean, she's this very, forthright and assertive and coarse and vulgar girl. But the master says to her, when he gives her the alethiometer, he says, you're going to need your goodness and your sweetness and your determination, which, I mean, even at that point, I was like, what? Like, I didn't see that. But it's there.
Yeah. He sees it. He certainly, again, they have affection for her at Jordan College, quite a bit of affection for her. And he says they're going to miss her. But her take on it is different. She doesn't really see that they see her that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, we're seeing all this through the eyes of a 11-year-old, just to imagine yourself at 11-year-old, or imagine 11 years old. I mean, I can't imagine seeing the world the way I see it now, right. So, we're seeing this through completely from a child's perspective, and that's usually wrong.
Exactly. The alethiometer.
Mm-hmm.
This is a big piece of this story.
It's a golden compass.
A golden compass. This is the namesake of the book. We're introduced to this device. She's given the device by the master and told to keep it secret from Mrs. Coulter, but it's not clear. He's not able to tell her what or what not to do with Lord Asriel. He's sort of interrupted before is able to tell her what to do with, and she's not really sure what to do with it. Mm-hmm. But as she examines it, it's a curious device. It's not like anything she's ever seen. Apparently there's only 8 of them in existence, and she has one in her possession, which is amazing that she's been given this.
I think what cracks me up about the alethiometer is that the master just gives it to her. He's like, here, it's going to tell you the truth. You'll figure it out. And the descriptions are like just these 35 symbols. There's like all these symbols or whatever, and she has no way to know what that is. Like, if it's so important, it's just like, how could you just give this kid this thing? Mm-hmm. And I mean, how would you ever figure out how to use it? and it has different hands, which I loved. I love the idea of that too, that it has 4 hands, 3 sets. You can click yourself, but the 4th one
just spins around.
It just spins around and I guess does.
Yeah. I mean, imagine if you were looking at some device that you're supposed to, you don't even know what to do. It tells the truth, quote unquote. And some of the symbols are angel, helmet, dolphin, globe, lute, compasses, candle, thunderbolt, horse. What are we supposed to do with that?
It all makes sense to me, man. I don't know what you're talking about. It reminds me of the Bill Cipher thing from Gravity Falls.
Yes.
Oh, totally.
Right?
Yeah. So it's we don't know much about it. We can't really dive too much into what it is yet, obviously, because we haven't really learned ourselves during this reread. But JoAnna, it's such a good point. Imagine if there was something in our world that there was only 8 of them in the entire world. And a scholar handed it to an 11-year-old and said, keep it secret, keep it safe. This isn't the ring of power going to Frodo. This is something that its value can't even be measured. People study this thing and it doesn't make sense. And he doesn't even, he waits till the last second to give it to her. He's had it this whole time, and he could have given her classes on it or talked about what it's for. And it could be that her departure was rushed and he wasn't really ready for it, which is sort of alluded to, but not totally. But she has one of the most valuable things in the entire universe in her hands. And it's like, take it with you, hide it, keep it in this satchel.
I'm so anxious to learn more about this thing. What kind of truth does it tell? Does it tell fact, or does it tell, truth? Or,
is it is it a magic 8-ball, basically?
Right.
That has an infinite number of responses, basically.
Right. What kind of science makes that? What kind of, magic makes that? I need to know.
Well, witches are mentioned in these 2 chapters.
Mm-hmm.
So there is a little bit of a tease that there's magic in this world, because I don't know that we've gotten a lot of that yet, that there's literal magic in this world until witches are mentioned. Of course, witches don't necessarily have to be magic, but if we're going to assume in a fantasy novel that witches are mentioned, that they probably have some magical gifts.
Yeah.
The dust is elaborated a little bit more on here, but it's just what we already knew from the first 3 chapters. I don't know that we're learning still. Lyra is led in on more information, but it's information that we sort of knew from what we'd seen in Asriel's presentation.
Mm-hmm.
But what we didn't necessarily know is how deep the gobblers and what they needed children for, because this is the first time I think we've heard them mention a quote sacrifice.
Right.
We don't know what that is yet, but it puts a pit in my stomach when I read it, and certainly Lyra is struck by it as well.
Mm-hmm.
What is the sacrifice? What's going to happen? What are the kids being used for?
Who are they sacrificing to?
Where are they taking them?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because oblation that's what it means. It means a sacrifice. And, but it's such an ominous term. Sacrifice is one thing, but, oblation just sounds horrific. I don't know. It's got such a deeply dark connotation to me. I don't know why.
And for our listeners who may not know exactly what oblate literally means, and they explain in the book that it was this medieval parents willingly giving their children to be a monk or a nun, which the fact that they're sort of called, this is not willing. They're not asking parents for children. They're stealing children.
Yes.
And it's just, and so for me, not that the original one was a great idea to begin with, but it's already a perversion of whatever the original thing was, because they're not asking, they're just taking, they're stealing children.
Mm-hmm.
But right. Yeah, what are they going to do to that?
It could be that the sort of general public or the scholars that are aware of the ablation board and what they're doing, their knowledge of what they're really doing is somewhat limited. What Mrs. Coulter doing is darker and she's keeping it secret. She's stealing them, and I think some of the people there at the party think that, like you said, they are being volunteered or they're joining the cause. They're sort of not completely clued in on what's really happening with the ablation board.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly the people that are accepting the children somewhere, they are aware.
Right. But they also say, Mrs. Coulter is the ablation board, like the way he talks about it. So it's not as though there's nobody checking her is the point. And so whatever is happening, there's not as though there's this other, like, it's just happening. And there's no other outside group that's coming in and sort of checking to see, so she can do whatever she wants. But yeah, it's a very interesting. I'm worried.
Yeah, I'm worried.
I'm worried for the children.
I'm worried for the children. Very worried for the children.
Yeah.
Any other specific points?
It's like, oh,
I know. It's so upsetting.
I'm very worried. Like it makes me. No, I don't have any more. I want to get off the gobblers.
I know.
Although I now know why they're called gobblers, which thank goodness. Because I was like, durr. That's why they're called gobblers. Yes.
Right. It's like the most obvious reveal, but then you're like, yeah, of course they're called the gobblers. Okay, I get it now. Yeah.
Right.
You guys have any other notes specifically? I mean, I wanted to, close out the recap and maybe go into another, piece of the show where we were talking about our favorite passages in this 2-chapter period.
Let me pull up the book and find it for this one. Okay, go ahead.
JoAnna, what do you got? I have a really short one.
I'm waiting to hear what Travis or Alaric says. I'm still looking for it in the book.
Okay, so I'll do, Travis, I'll do mine because it's really, really short. Okay. I already read the passage that I really struck me, which was about the lessons that Mrs. Coulter was giving Lyra. But I have one sentence that I just loved. Lyra's knowledge had great gaps in it, like a map of the world largely eaten by mice.
Yeah, that was great.
Great line.
That was great.
Such a great line.
I mean, mine was just the introduction to the Panzerbjorn. So it's in the fortress of Svalbard, I'm told, guarded by Panzerbjorn, armored bears.
And you laughed just like that when you read it.
I did. Goodness, I love the concept of armored bears.
It's so great. I can't wait to meet them. JoAnna, did you find yours?
I think my favorite part, okay. I don't know. No, I do. Okay. One of my favorite parts is when Pan is like, so when are we leaving? And she was like, what are you talking about? He was like, we're never going north. Like, she's just taking you to do these things to like placate you or to distract you. We're never going north. And she was like, you don't know what you're talking about. And then deep inside, she's like, she doubts. Like, I just love that part because then at some point he's right. And I guess I love that. He must know that she knows. Like, do you know what I mean? He has to know. Doesn't he know?
Well, they're connected in that way.
Yeah.
Right. But so I love the idea that she's trying to hide something from him that there's no way she could hide that anyway, but she's trying desperately because she's so stubborn and she's so like, just so Lyra that she's like, no, it's not. and she's still trying to hide something from what is literally the other part of her soul. I just love that idea that she's that stubborn.
She's literally lying to herself.
She's literally
she's literally lying to herself. Excellent. Yes.
That's a very good point. I had another little thing I wanted. It's not, we don't have to discuss it, but the solar system in this world only has 6 planets.
Yes. Yes. Oh my God. Yes. Why?
Well, what I was thinking is it's possible or plausible that the technology hasn't been able to see a certain distance, but we have to go pretty far back in our history before they weren't able to see Neptune and Uranus. So this is a different world.
Yeah. Here's my guess, and I'm probably way out there, is that the other planets, or at least one of the other planets, has been pulverized and is the dust.
Whoa. Mind blown.
Right?
I like that.
It'd be cool. I don't know why or how that would have happened. I'm just totally reading into this. My own fanfic.
Is this headcanon? Are we going to accept this as headcanon?
This is Travis's headcanon once again.
It's a dangerous thing.
Exactly.
Did we get any feedback this week? I saw someone was going to send feedback, but I don't know if we got the feedback.
Did not get feedback yet.
All right. Well, we're going to keep trucking here. We hope you guys will send us some feedback. Feedback at theamberspyglass.com. I demand your feedback at theamberspycast.com. Yes, please.
Send us something, please.
You know what? Maybe just like, hi, this is us. We're listening, and we can shout you out next week.
Yeah. And if you're on Facebook and you're listening, absolutely, and you're not, you haven't liked our group, please do.
Please do.
We'd love to have you. We've got about 70 plus people there now. It's turning into a real party, and we'd love to have you there.
Do we want to shout out our the amazing art that we have on that page?
Yes, we have fantastic art by an artist named Tiffany Deep. You can find her at Tiffany Deep. That's TiffanyDiep on Twitter and on Instagram. She's outstanding. She's got some just lovely His Dark Materials concept art that she put together. I don't want to equate it to anything because I feel like that would kind of cheapen her work. And but it's just gorgeous, and you should check her out and let us know what you think, and we'll pass the note on to her or send a note directly to her.
There's a real whimsy in the work that is striking to me, and there's a softness to it that's is a real warmth and a softness to her art for this. And Lyra is mentioned as a dark blonde in this these last 2 chapters. I was like, there it is. I was wondering where that description was coming through. So there it is. But beautiful art. Please do check out her work.
And she's got a fantastic image of armored bears that I think you'll all really get a kick out of.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, any closing thoughts, JoAnna?
I am just wondering. I'm worried. I want to jump into these next couple chapters because I want to know where she's going to go. She's in London. She's far from Oxford. Like
the streets of London. Yeah. And how long is she going to be gone before they realize she's gone, and who's going to come after her? And Mrs. Coulter certainly has resources to track her down.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And what chapters we are reading? 6 and 7, or 6, 7, and 8?
6 and 7.
6 and 7 is our next next podcast. So look for our next podcast. We'll be recording next week and dropping it. We're dropping it Monday-ish each week. So we'll try to keep on that schedule for everyone. Does that sound good?
Cool.
That sounds excellent.
Thumbs up all around. Well, I hope everyone had a very happy 4th of July. We're just coming out of 4th of July weekend. And we look forward to coming back to you next week.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Cheers.
See you later.